The bright spring sun hardly had time to melt the thin April frost on the gravel of Windsor's inner courtyard, when a barely noticed conversation, captured only by the keenest palace staff, shifted from routine pleasantries to muted astonishment. A discreet aide, fresh from an early briefing, murmured a single sentence to a senior equerry, who immediately stiffened, as though the morning air had turned colder again. A handful of footmen exchanged narrowed glances, the kind of glances that ripple through a royal household whenever something significant hovers just out of earshot. By lunchtime, the murmurs had floated from the underground service corridors to polished reception rooms. Princess Charlotte, it seemed, had done something no protocol manual had anticipated, and her parents were visibly shaken by the magnitude of the moment. Courtiers who normally keep their observations locked behind expressionless facades later admitted, under condition of anonymity, that they had never seen Prince William lower his gaze so quickly, trying, and failing, to mask. Eyes suddenly misted by pride and disbelief. Before the whispers hardened into rumor, the official schedule pressed on. A mid-afternoon engagement at the National Maritime Museum unfolded with its usual choreography of greetings, briefings, and carefully timed pauses for photographers. Nothing in the public footage betrayed the undercurrent swirling beneath those calm surfaces. Yet seasoned royal correspondents sensed tension just beneath William's well-trained smile, as though the internal pulse of a father, not a future monarch, set the rhythm of his steps. Catherine, equally accomplished in smoothing even the sharpest edges of scrutiny, lingered a fraction longer beside her husband than protocol demanded, her hand settling on his elbow in a gesture that balanced decorum with unmistakable reassurance. Those who know her well insist that such fleeting touches are Catherine's quiet language, the language that says everything is under control, even when neither spreadsheets nor centuries-old precedents offer guidance. Hours earlier, behind closed doors, that same quiet language had been directed toward 10-year-old Charlotte Elizabeth Diana. The child who once shyly clutched her mother's skirt now stood in the small breakfast salon beneath portraits of Queen Victoria's children. Her shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes bright with the earnest seriousness that only earnest children can summon. A tutor, summoned for a routine revision of history lessons, had brought an interactive display on climate change solutions. Charlotte had surprised the room by asking not about sea levels or carbon cycles, but about policy negotiation. She wanted to know how leaders turned data into legislation, how politics translated anxiety into action. William, entering halfway through, watched in silence as she dissected the concept of carbon offset certificates, then pivoted to ask whether shipping corridors could be rerouted to preserve migratory whale populations. The tutor, suddenly aware that the lesson had outgrown its plan, glanced imploringly at Catherine. The Duchess simply smiled, an almost imperceptible nod that said, "Let her continue." In that instant, something intangible crystallized. To outsiders, it might sound like a precocious child indulging a moment of curiosity. To a father whose public duty will one day shape governments, it felt like an unexpected mirror in Charlotte's brisk, alert questioning. He saw flashes of his own first diplomatic tutorials, the ones his late mother insisted he undertake while other boys still debated football statistics. But where young William had bristled, resenting what seemed like obligations, stacked atop his adolescence, Charlotte radiated eagerness. It was as though she tasted, for the first time, the particular flavor of responsibility that only the crown can serve, and found it exhilarating rather than onerous. After the lesson she asked, quite matter-of-factly, whether she might join William at the upcoming Earthshot debrief in London, just to listen. It was not a theatrical plea engineered for parental approval. It was a logistical request, delivered with the calm certainty that if the space could be made, she would fill it competently. William, caught off guard, managed a gentle chuckle, half pride, half disbelief. He promised to discuss it with her mother, but Charlotte's eyes already danced with the quiet conviction that her seat at that table was a question of timing, not permission. What happened next, is the shard of narrative that pierced the palace hush and set the entire household buzzing. A well-known foreign ambassador arrived for an unscheduled courtesy call, sensitive trade papers in his briefcase, and a habitual skepticism etched into his seasoned diplomat's face. Protocol dictated a brief greeting in the white drawing room. No family members present. Yet as the ambassador crossed the threshold, he encountered, quite by accident, Charlotte emerging from an adjacent corridor, clutching a folder of handwritten notes. Caught, both paused. Instead of the curtsy she had been drilled to deliver, Charlotte stepped forward, one deliberate pace, and offered a firm handshake. She addressed him by name, thanked him for supporting polar research grants, an obscure detail buried in his recent speeches, and added that she had a follow-up question about marine oil spill mitigation through microbial bioremediation. The ambassador, thunderstruck, replied that he might better defer to his scientific attaché. Charlotte tilted her head, smiled politely, and said she would look forward to that conversation, then excused herself with a confidence that belonged to no child of 10. The entire exchange lasted perhaps 15 seconds, but it detonated in royal circles with the force of a 100-gun salute. Within the hour, the story reached William and Catherine. Witnesses described William lowering into an antique chair, as though the air itself had thickened, hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles paled. A single exhalation, sharp, almost disbelieving, escaped him before he broke into quiet, tremulous laughter. Not the laughter of mirth, but the sort that arrives when a heart cannot decide whether to break or burst with pride. Catherine, standing at his side, brushed a tear from her own cheek and murmured something only he could hear. Observers suspect. It was a reminder that they always knew Charlotte's potential. They simply hadn't expected to glimpse it so soon, or so vividly. That evening, while the city beyond Windsor's walls pulsed with ordinary Thursday bustle, the couple sat in the private study and confronted an unspoken implication. Charlotte's childhood, carefully shielded from the sharper edges of royal expectation, was accelerating toward a horizon none of them could yet discern. William scrolled through a digital schedule, noting engagements where a discreet child's presence might no longer be an indulgence but an asset. Catherine, meanwhile, reviewed briefing documents on youth diplomacy programs, marking segments that could be adapted for a royal adolescent. They did not speak of succession. George's future remains the structured spine of the monarchy, but they acknowledged, tacitly, that the crown's resilience sometimes emerges from its unexpected branches, not its primary trunk. The conversation soon drifted to comparisons with the late Queen Elizabeth II, who at a similar age delivered an impromptu wartime radio address that steadied millions. The parallels felt both flattering and formidable. Could they harness Charlotte's burgeoning poise without burdening her? Could they allow her to taste responsibility in measured sips, rather than the heady draft that once overwhelmed William himself? They agreed on a watchword: calibration. Every invitation, every briefing, every appearance would be weighed, not only for public optics, but for its impact on Charlotte's inner compass. Yet palace life obeys its own momentum. 3 days later, at the Chelsea Flower Show, Charlotte reappeared beside her parents for what had been intended as a low-key family outing. Reporters noted the subtle recalibration in her posture. Shoulders aligned square to the cameras, feet planted with the surety of someone who understood framing, but eyes roaming freely across the exhibits, absorbing facts faster than aides could whisper them. When a horticulturist described the role of pollinators in food security, Charlotte surprised him by citing statistics on declining bee populations in East Anglia, then wondered aloud whether microscopic analysis of pollen grains could trace cross-county migration corridors. William's eyebrows lifted. Catherine's fingers traced a light arc across Charlotte's back. Her silent signal of encouragement and restraint rolled into one. The footage that captivated public audiences, however, came later, when a group of schoolchildren swarmed the sensory garden. One little boy with mobility difficulties hesitated at a narrow path. Charlotte, without waiting for adult intervention, knelt to his level, offered her hand, and led him along the fragrant rosemary wall, matching his pace, pointing out blossoms he could safely reach. The cameras captured her gentle commentary, her patient smile. They also captured William blinking hard, his jaw tightening against fresh emotion. It was as if he watched a living answer to the question that has haunted every heir since media scrutiny turned microscopic. Can you raise a child within gilded corridors and still cultivate empathy that feels genuine? That single clip ricocheted across social platforms, amassing millions of views before dusk. Analysts praised Royal Communications for staging such authenticity, unaware that no staging had occurred at all. Behind palace gates, the senior staff convened an unscheduled meeting, risk assessment disguised as strategy. The master of the household argued for expanding Charlotte's experiential education, low-profile workshops with environmental NGOs, private tours of tech startups tackling water purification, simulation sessions with diplomatic language coaches. The Lord Chamberlain cautioned against overexposure, noting that adulation can sour into scrutiny with blistering speed. The private secretary proposed a compromise, shadow engagements, where Charlotte could attend in plain sight, yet remain an observer, her presence acknowledged but undefined, granting her the freedom to learn without assuming the mantle of spokesperson. All the while, Charlotte herself remained blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic choreography swirling around her. In the school library, she devoured a biography of pioneering aviator Bessie Coleman, leaving margin notes about aerodynamic drag. During ballet class, she asked whether the lighting technician could show her how LED gels alter emotional tone on stage. At bedtime, she quizzed William about the Commonwealth's renewable energy commitments, deftly steering the conversation away from bedtime stories and into real-world metrics. William sometimes answered, sometimes redirected her to age-appropriate reading, but always marveled at her capacity to absorb, synthesize, and, most disarming of all, empathize. The empathy surfaced again during the Trooping the Colour rehearsal. In early June, George practiced the formal salute expected of him. Louis struggled to keep his concentration, eyes darting toward the cavalry horses. Charlotte, standing between her brothers, sensed Louis's restless energy building to a disruptive crescendo. Without turning, she brushed her fingers against his wrist, a nonverbal reminder of timing and composure. He exhaled, steadied, and resumed position. Senior officers on the parade ground exchanged approving nods. None missed the quiet authority radiating from the middle child. Later, inside Horse Guards, Catherine whispered that Charlotte seemed born with an instinctive metronome for ceremony. William replied that, if anything, she seemed born with an instinctive metronome for people. That human barometer revealed itself in private tragedy as well. When a longtime royal gardener, Mr. Havers, suffered a sudden stroke, it was Charlotte who insisted upon delivering flowers personally to his hospital ward. She drafted a short note thanking him for teaching her about ladybird larvae as natural pest control. Staff assumed Catherine had guided every syllable, yet medical orderlies reported that Charlotte read the message aloud to Havers herself, voice steady, diction clear, then asked if she might water his tomato seedlings until he recovered. The story never reached the tabloids, but within inner circles, it became definitive proof that Charlotte's empathy was not a public performance, but a private reflex. Inevitably, the press did catch scent of her expanding portfolio. Headlines toggled between awe and alarm. Some columnists hailed a new people's princess, resurrecting language last reserved for Diana. Others fretted about childhood, forfeited to royal machinery. Kensington Palace declined to comment, letting the silence speak for the family's intention to protect Charlotte's still fragile adolescence. Yet silence does not halt speculation. Soon analysts churned out essays about modernizing monarchy, predicting a future in which Charlotte might champion global education or climate diplomacy, working in tandem with, rather than in the shadow, of her elder brother's constitutional destiny. Inside the palace, William and Catherine confronted the paradox that every royal parent eventually faces. By cultivating ordinariness, they risked stifling exceptional gifts. By encouraging those gifts, they risked accelerating the loss of ordinariness. They opted for a middle path, albeit one paved daily with recalibration. Charlotte's schedule now includes coding workshops at a nearby university lab, strictly off-camera, alongside pottery classes at a village community center, where her apron is as splattered with clay as any of her classmates. She attends selective briefings on humanitarian crises, yet homework is still non-negotiable, screen time still rationed. The tension between extraordinary and ordinary defines her routine, the way tension between melody and rhythm defines music. One late summer evening, lightning forked across the Berkshire sky as the family gathered for a simple dinner. A clap of thunder rattled the window panes, and Louis jolted, nearly upsetting his glass. Charlotte reached across the table, steadying his hand with a calm that belied the storm outside. William watched, mind drifting to a memory of his own childhood. Fear of thunderstorms, soothed only by the steady presence of his mother. For a moment he saw in his daughter not merely a modern princess, not merely a symbol of institutional continuity, but a human bridge between past and future, heartbreak and hope. In that quiet flash of insight, he realized why the unnamed household staff a weeks earlier had approached him, voice trembling, to recount the ambassador handshake. It was not the diplomatic finesse that had truly astonished the observer. It was the seamless fusion of gravitas and warmth, intellect and empathy, the ability to pivot from data to compassion in a breath. That fusion is rare even among seasoned statesmen, rarer still in children. And it left William contemplating possibilities that extended well beyond court circulars or coronation balconies. Yet possibility is not destiny. Charlotte's story remains fluid, her trajectory mapped only in pencil. At breakfast, she still sneaks extra jam when the footman's back is turned. She still giggles at her father's deliberately terrible jokes, the ones Catherine affectionately labels dad humor of the highest order. She still races down carpeted corridors in mismatched socks, skidding to a halt only when reminded that dignified princesses are not, technically, meant to impersonate ice skaters on antique rugs. These ordinary, rebellious sparks reassure William, and Catherine, that childhood, however compressed by circumstance, is still alive and crackling inside her. Nevertheless, somewhere in the secure archives of royal planning, a slim folder now bears Charlotte's initials. It contains projected educational pathways, lists of potential mentors in environmental policy, even a tentative outline for philanthropic patronages timed to coincide with her 18th birthday. The folder is not destiny, but it is preparation, shaped by lessons the family learned too late with earlier generations. Without preparation, potential can buckle under the flashbulbs of expectation. With preparation, it might illuminate corridors far beyond palace walls. Tonight, as the lamplighters in the great park disappear into the dusk and the castle settles into its ancient hush, a single lamp in a second-floor study still glows. Charlotte, long past her bedtime, lingers over a world atlas, tracing shipping lanes with her finger. Catherine peeks in, issues a gentle reminder, and receives a conspiratorial grin. One last line, then sleep. Down the hall, William reviews briefing notes for tomorrow's engagement, aware that his speech on sustainable fisheries will benefit from a question his daughter posed that very afternoon. He jots a marginal note, circles a statistic, and, in that small pen stroke, acknowledges the subtle reshaping of his own professional horizon by a child not yet tall enough to ride every amusement park attraction. Outside, the night wind rattles the leaded glass, carrying faint echoes of centuries, battles fought, thrones defended, empires dissolved. Inside, the future whispers through corridor shadows, wearing ballet slippers and holding a folder of handwritten environmental questions. It is a future that has already left seasoned ambassadors momentarily speechless, that has already coaxed proud tears from a man trained from boyhood to master his emotions. Where it leads is still cloaked in the veiled language of possibility, but one thing is certain. The daughter once nicknamed Mignonette is stepping, steadily, into a role that no courtier, no protocol, and perhaps no monarchy historian entirely foresaw. And somewhere beyond the palace gates the world waits, curious, skeptical, hopeful, to see just how wide those steady footsteps will someday echo.